You could get lost really easily here. This morning we are heading to Co Thi Tunnel, something that I really wanted to see while here in Vietnam. It is about 2 hours north of Ho Chi Minh. We have a van coming to pick us up and we'll see what it's all about. So we just made it to Co Thi, and before we go to the tunnel, I just want to give you a little bit of background on basically what happened here. So back in the mid-1800s, the French came here and actually started to colonize Vietnam, and they stayed here until the First World War, where most of the troops actually had to go back home to fight the war. During that time, this place was basically undefended, so the Japanese came in. Well, at first, the Vietnamese were very happy to see the Japanese. They were seen as savior until they realized that the Japanese regime here was much worse than the French one. Until the Second World War, where the Japanese were kind of in the same situation, had to leave to fight. The Japanese ultimately lost the Second World War, making their military extremely weak, and this is when the French decided to come back here. Some people in Vietnam, especially in the south, were very happy to see the French back in the country, but during that period of time, the northern part of the country became actually communist. In 1954, a court in Geneva actually recognized the North as a nation and the South as a different nation, and this was supposed to last until the following election that was supposed to reunite the entire country of Vietnam, but that never happened because the Vietnam War actually started. And now you're caught up. This helicopter, like everything else here, is actually American. But why did the American get involved here? Where, to be honest, the Vietnam War is basically a proxy war between communist countries versus non-communist countries that just happened to be fought here in Vietnam. So the northern side of the country was basically sponsored by China and Russia, and the south by France, by the US, and a ton of other non-communist countries. And the reason why the Americans came here to fight against communism is that they were scared of the domino effect. They thought that if this country fell to communism, then other country would after the fact as well.
So even though the Vietnam War lasted for about 20 years, in the 1960s, the US came in and basically thought that they were going to end the war because they had better equipment and things like that. But they were very wrong.
The reality is that the Americans were not used to fight in this type of environment, the jungle, and especially not used to guerrilla tactic that the Vietnamese were known to be using. Now, what is guerrilla warfare? Well, it's basically unconventional military tactics. The Vietnam War didn't really have a front line. People were simply walking in the jungle, and at some point they were getting attacked and they didn't understand where it was coming from. And one of the main reasons for that is this famous tunnel system that we're going to go visit, because the Viet Congs were just popping out, attacking the Americans, the Australians and others, and then disappearing back in those tunnels. The Viet Congs were truly master at using their environment, at using the jungle to their advantage, because like I said earlier, the West, well, we are not used to fight in this kind of environment.
So the first tunnel system is 5 meters. That's what we're going to start off with. We're just going to slowly, gradually work our way up to the other ones. But also, if you do book this tour, it's not compulsory that you have to go in them, so you can just come see the around and not go in the tunnel. I don't know, the last time I was in caves, I actually got a little claustrophobic, so I am curious to see how this goes, because it's tight. David, don't fall. The stairs are...
So it might look tight, but they actually made these tunnels a little bit wider than the original one for tourists. So imagine that, how tiny these were. And like, they go left and right. I mean, if I wasn't following someone and if they wouldn't put like, pieces of wood blocking the other ways, Like, you could get lost really easily here. Look. When I was saying earlier that the guerrilla soldiers were simply disappearing after an attack, well, this is how. What you're looking at here is one of the many entrances for the Cu Chi tunnels. Very tight and quite frankly claustrophobic, this is how they were doing it. Okay.
Yeah, just to make sure David doesn't come back here again.
That's the second camera, so like I just made it through the hole. It is so tight, guys. This tunnel is even smaller. These here, this is a bunker here, and they were using these holes to actually shoot the troops outside, and the troops would have no idea where the gunfires are coming from.
Yeah. Welcome back to the world. Cambodia welcomes you.
Let me tell you guys, I am not a big guy. I'm about like 5'9", 160 pounds. Okay, I lied. I'm 5'8" and a half, and I really wish I was 5'9". But to be honest, like going into that little hole in the ground was really tight. Even with my arm up, like there's a massive squeeze for me at the shoulder level. So I cannot imagine doing this like days in and days out. So underground, they had what they called a smokeless kitchen. So they had a kitchen, obviously, to cook food for the Viet Congs down there. But basically, the chimney was going underground, like over 10 meters away from the location of the kitchen. So if the Americans, while flying, would spot a smoke coming out of the ground, they would bomb the chimney instead of the kitchen where the people were. This is a luxury that the people in the tunnel didn't have back in the days, some sort of shower. They actually didn't even have bathrooms down there.
So now basically the main food that they're eating down there is actually tapioca. And tapioca is a root, which I didn't know. So now we have a chance to try it.
They were even dipping it in like salt and peanut. Because without it, to be honest, it doesn't taste like much, but it's a lot of calories and that's what you need. Now we're getting to a portion that's much more smaller. They started to build this tunnel system back in 1948. By the end of the war, they had over 250 kilometers of tunnels. A lot of these tunnel systems have 3 different levels, going from 3 meters below the surface up to 10 meters. I don't know if it's easy to see on the video, but like this is tight and it's getting tighter. But just imagine, they added in the last few years extra ventilation, because before that it was extremely hard to breathe in these tunnels. Thankfully, the government made it easier for tourists. And of course, on top of all the booby traps that were set in there, those tunnels by the Viet Cong, there's also bat, snakes, and a bunch of other venomous stuff you don't want to get too close of. So in the tunnel system, they had a bunch of different rooms, from literally hospital, gun storage, kitchen, and everything, including some relaxing room. And every single relaxing room, well, they didn't have normal bed. They had hammocks to avoid those creepy crawlers that I was talking about earlier. That's something. I couldn't imagine living down there. That was like 5-6 minutes, and I'm sweaty. Another very interesting guerrilla tactic that they were using, they were making basically like rubber sandals out of old tires, but they were making them in a way that when they were walking forward on the ground, it was leaving track like they were walking the other way to just throw the enemy off. Now, why is it common to say that the US lost the war? Well, back in the days, this war became extremely unpopular back in America. In fact, in today's money, it costed over $1 trillion to maintain this war going on this side of the world. And because it was the first televised conflict, people were seeing how ugly the war was even back in America in their house. So there was a lot of protest and a lot of pressure on the government to pull the troop out. Then in 1973, the US fully pulled out of the war, and 2 years later, well, the North took over the side, which created basically the end of the Vietnam War. But now you have to remember one thing: the goal of that war was to prevent communism to spread. And to this day, Vietnam is very progressive, but still a communist state. One extra thing that you can do on this tour, which we will link down below if you want to come and do it because it's really cool, it's extra, but you can go to the shooting range and shoot some actual weapon from the Vietnam War. Oh, that was funny.
Cheer up.
Looking at the city behind us of Ho Chi Minh, it's really hard to understand everything that happened without going to these very specific places that are just reminiscence of the past.
Yeah, like you hear obviously what happened, but going to the tunnels, it truly like kind of puts you back there to know kind of like what they experienced, or a glimpse into the past at least. But our guide summed it up really well. He was fantastic. He basically said at the end, forgive, but we don't forget. So basically recognize what has happened and how horrific it was, to be quite frank. But the new generation here seems to be very much moving forward from it. Good relations with everyone. He did say some of the older generation still holds that, and I 100%.
They lived it because
like,
they really
I can see
lived
that.
it.
Yeah. So anyways, it was a good day, kind of learning more about it, things that I had no clue about.
Yeah, a little bit of a different video for us, lots of information, but sometimes it's important to learn things.
Very much so.
So I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, see you guys
In the next one.